Welcome back to our channel. I want to thank you for joining. We had a few days off, and I want to thank you for those who continue to watch our content. Here we talk geopolitics on how the continent of Africa engage its strategic partners from around the world. Today, I really want to look at a number of topics that are very important, talking about BRICS, the de-dollarization, and more importantly, a number of accusations regards to China's debt trapping and how the continent of Africa, to an extent, can re-strategize looking at the country of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zambia, and more importantly, why BRICS was not formed to an extent depending on the perception on Africa's strategic partners, specifically South Africa, has been viewed in a way that it is as if it's promoting BRICS to replace the global system. However, we have important videos here to play. We have an expert who will break it down for us and give us more context on the reason why. These are challenging times in the global economy. You know how we do it here. We don't keep you waiting. We don't hold you hostage. We just go straight into specifics. But first, let's start with this, and then we will dive into more discussions regards to the most important issues that are currently plaguing the global economy and how global South countries can respond to an extent.
You're beginning to see another world already born. You don't need to actually build this world politically. It's already being built largely. It's a kind of own goal by the United States. Trump may be angry about de-dollarization. Well, he should be. He should be angry about it. But a large part of de-dollarization is not happening politically by countries like India and so on. It's happening because the US continues to use the dollar as a political instrument and is sending countries off searching for other ways to trade with each other. In that sense, the United States is actually the great driver of de-dollarization, not the BRICS countries.
So this notion that the BRICS was formed to counteract Western institutions or markets and a number of very important strategic relationship that concerns trade, economic integration, partnership, trade, investment, export. But again, the countries across the BRICS regions do have their own individual responsibilities and challenges that they are going through. And it's wise for them to look for alternative to an extent. But again, it's been perceived in the global media to an extent that BRICS is out there to challenge the global order. But what we fail to understand is that BRICS countries too have problems and difficulties. They have huge populations that to an extent need products and services. And when we look at the partners around the world, in Europe and the United States of America, to an extent cannot absorb the products being produced from these big countries. And more importantly, these markets cannot meet the needs of global countries, of global South countries. So to point out, talking about Brazil, Russia, South Africa, India, and also China itself. And it's important for this country, we've seen BRICS growing at the moment, to look for alternatives, to figure out how to survive at this challenging time. So BRICS was essential, according to the expert, who went ahead to elaborate a little bit more on why the perception in regards to BRICS is not going to hold grounds.
Vijay Prashad, welcome to Upfront.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be with you.
Let's talk about the BRICS countries, a coalition made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and now lately expanded with new members joining Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, and recently Indonesia. You know, different countries have different reasons for wanting to be a part of the BRICS, but the fundamental reason is to create a counter response, a countermeasure to Western dominance, and also to create other alternatives to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. What's your verdict? Have they achieved that mission?
Well, the first thing to remember is that the BRICS project is actually quite modest. It's not to change the world. That was never the project. You have to understand that in 2007, when the financial crisis took place with the subprime mortgages exploding in the United States, it looked to many countries, big countries like Brazil, India, China, South Africa, it looked to them that the Western markets that they'd come to rely upon, the United States in particular, but also European markets, were not going to forever be able to absorb the goods and services produced in these large locomotives of the South. And for that reason, these countries began to turn to each other to think of a kind of South-South trading world. It has since developed further and has perhaps taken on a slight political air, where these countries have begun to think about organizing institutions outside Western control. But principally, if we just take the first objective, which was to increase trade across the global South, that has indeed taken place and taken place pretty successfully.
On the aspect of de-dollarization, I think this is the most sensitive section regarding how the United States of America perceive countries like South Africa, China, and Russia and India, looking at Brazil, to be promoting this de-dollarization. It's important to know that countries like Ethiopia are looking BRICS to be a very strategic bloc that will enable them scale in terms of their manufacturing, their export, and doing business within across their borders. So this notion of de-dollarization, we all saw how the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump, came out clear and singled out South Africa to an extent and say that these countries like China and also Russia, including South Africa or India, who are coming together to undermine the dollar, it's going to be consequences. They're going to be sanctions to an extent. They're going to be put under watch, so to point out. So geopolitics is a terrible game. And if you do not understand how this works, it will creep gradually and start affecting your consumption pattern, your borrowing pattern, and how you run your country. So the de-dollarization issue has been put into question to an extent, but this expert says that the United States of America itself should have itself to blame to an extent, because it has pushed this de-dollarization issue to an extent where it does not realize its own implication on why the United States of America, to an extent, is one of those that are propagating these particular measures where countries are beginning to look for alternatives.
So in recent years, a growing number of countries have been making moves to de-dollarize, that is to decrease their dependency on the US dollar. BRICS countries such as Russia and India have also increased their transactions, settling their transactions in their local currencies, trading rupees for rubles. Now, given the instability that is being caused by Donald Trump's tariffs, are we likely to see more countries in the BRICS, in the global South, taking similar moves of exploring the possibility of trading in different currencies other than the dollar?
Well, some of this trade has been taking place in what are known as local currencies. In other words, they are trading goods and services in their own currencies. That's been happening since 2007, 2008. Secondly, the United States, for political reasons, has been sanctioning more and more countries. It has increased sanctions over this past decade, 900%, enormous increase of sanctions. That's the second way in which a decoupling has been happening. Okay, then the third issue is the US government has been putting increasing pressure on China through its tariffs policy, sanctions policy, and so on. China, therefore, has also pivoted away from the US market, seeing that sections of its important exports, for instance, in telecommunications, not being allowed into Europe, not being allowed into the United States. So China has also pivoted away from US-controlled institutions. As you see Russia, China, sanctioned countries pivot away, countries like India, which rely on Western markets for the export of services, begin to look for other places, English-speaking countries, where they can export their services. You're beginning to see another world already born. You don't need to actually build this world politically. It's already being built largely. It's a kind of own goal by the United States. Trump may be angry about de-dollarization. Well, he should be. He should be angry about it. But a large part of de-dollarization is not happening politically by countries like India and so on. It's happening because the US continues to use the dollar as a political instrument and is sending countries off searching for other ways to trade with each other. In that sense, the United States is actually the great driver of de-dollarization, not the BRICS countries.
So, talking about debt trap, we've heard how Western nations, Chinese partners, African partners have criticized a number of African countries who borrow money from China. And again, it should be noted that despite that China is African countries to the poor now and other developing nations around the world are owing money to China. But according to data, African countries owe more to multilateral institutions like World Bank, International Monetary Fund, international finance organizations than they owe to the country of China. So that should be set on one side.
And yet sometimes you see some insights into this from the United States itself. In 2023, the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, even admitted we won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there will be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them. How much leverage does Washington stand to lose here?
Well, by the way, that's one of my favorite television interviews where Marco Rubio, then a senator, effectively says that this is horrible. And the United States, by sanctioning countries, is losing the power to sanction them. I think it's a very interesting statement that he makes, and it's quite correct. He makes my point actually better than I'm making my point. He makes it bluntly, directly, and from a position of power. But I don't want to exaggerate this because the United States remains one of the major countries in the world. It has the largest military force under NATO. It is able to dominate most of the world. And it is the only country right now that is willing to forego capital controls, open its assets within its own territory for buying and selling, and therefore being able to have a global currency. No other currency is right now prepared. No other country is prepared to open up their currency to become essentially global fiat money. The Chinese are not willing to let go of capital controls, open up their financial markets. The Russians can't do it. They are sanctioned by too many people in the West in particular. The euro is not strong enough. I mean, no country really has the ability to take over from the dollar. It is going to remain in a position of dominance until we come up with a new strategy, perhaps some sort of BRICS currency or a United Nations currency, some kind of...
But we are a long way off from there, are we not? We are a long way off from there. But you've already told us that the world is realigning and that the US is actually, through these actions, these aggressive actions, forcing this realignment.
But more importantly, what we are looking at here is that experts are saying that the continent of Africa does have the opportunity to look to an extent to figure out how to make more important use in terms of the projects that they put forward on how they can leverage the opportunity, the natural resources and expertise that can be grown in the continent of Africa. So these are valuable concerns that people do have. Like the president of the country of Sierra Leone once said that it is up to the continent of African nations to figure out how to make proper use of this money that they borrow from China, for example, to give them a return on investment, and that enables them to pay their debt. So the expert was talking about that despite this particular concern, that African nations like the country of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zambia, can to an extent come out clear and start making more policy choices and the African groupings and figure out why they should import technology transfer into their country than rely to partners that do not to an extent provide them that alternative.
But let's just zone in on China for a moment. It has become one of the world's leading creditors, surpassing the World Bank and the IMF. But then it has also been criticized for offering debt diplomacy, what others are calling debt traps. The debt that developing countries owe to China is running into like 1.1 trillion US dollars. So China's actions themselves, are they pure or are they continuing those patterns of dominance and imperialism that impoverish poorer nations?
Well, it's interesting because this is a problem in our countries. When we go to any financial institution, whether it's the International Monetary Fund or it's the People's Bank of China, Our capacity has to improve to negotiate for better deals. We have to come there with better development projects. I mean, look at the case of countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. These two countries can be right now making an African electric car. Africa does not need to import cars from anywhere. It has all the raw materials and most of the expertise to make an African car. Why isn't that car being made right now? It's because our governments are simply not putting their heads together, coming up with good agreements, making deals with countries and demanding a technology transfer to make the African car or the Latin American aircraft. Why should a Latin American airline buy aircraft from Boeing and Airbus? Why not create our own aircraft? These are things we can do. This is our problem. This is not something we need to lay the blame at the People's Bank of China or even at the IMF
but Kenya, let's just pause for a moment. I mean, we saw those protests in Kenya, people taking to the streets as Ruto tried to raise revenue by increasing taxes. One of the problems there was not just the state of living, it was the previous loans that were afforded to Kenya by China. And that's why Kenya started saying, okay, fine, we're no longer looking east or west, we're looking ahead. They had to go back to the IMF and find a dual model of financing this. The rail network that Kenya built was costly and it was built by Chinese money. So there are elements of truth in that.
Well, but first we have to think about, are we controlling our own raw materials? I mean, look at, you gave the example of Kenya. Kenya is principally an exporter of tea, coffee, and cut flowers. Who owns the cut flower industry in Kenya? Who owns the land in the Kenyan highlands where the tea and coffee is grown? Let's talk about the fact that when Jomo Kenyatta comes to power in Kenya, they do not expropriate the colonial landholders, the planters of the highlands. It's still multinational corporations that dominate the tea and coffee of Kenya. Why is Kenya giving up its wealth to multinational corporations and then looking for loans to build a railway? Kenya should be selling its cut flowers, its tea and coffee processed into the world market, earning enough revenue, and then building its trains. Why do we need to be in debt? We are in debt because we don't control our resources. And in the case of Kenya, as you explained, the land question should be foremost on people's minds. Why are they out protesting the increase of fees on them? They should be out protesting how the land is still held colonially.
So these are challenging times. The global economy and the United States of America's perception regards to BRICS will continue. And more importantly, African nations and BRIC partners have huge challenges with bulging population and changing middle class. Of course, they have to look for alternatives in ways of doing business. As we all see how the United States of America, to an extent now, is shaking the global economy. So the global economy talking about tariffs, and countries cannot wait anymore. So these are critical times in the global South nations, and they are figuring out on how to survive with regards to without these global markets that they have relied on, like talking about the United States of America's market, and more importantly European markets as well. Most African nations must revitalize, must re-emerge and bring the African continental free trade area to give them that opportunity to trade inward other than relying too much. As we've seen countries like Lesotho having 50% before the baseline at the moment, which is 10%, South Africa coming under pressure, and a awful lot of other African nations who are feeling the pinch with regards to this particular Trump tariff. So the expert is talking on why this is a critical time in the global economy, and that global South countries cannot no longer rely on their partners in the global North, because to an extent those partners to themselves are struggling. So it's an opportunity for the continent of Africa and other more strategic partners looking at BRICS nations to come together and figure out how to make sure that their nationals and citizens can consume the products being produced, and then they can leverage that particular option and then grow trade among their own particular area.
Okay, let's go back to this geopolitical tension between China and the United States. Trump has placed, is it now 145% tariff on imports from China, and who knows what it will be when we wake up tomorrow morning. Given this, do you think Trump's tariffs against China are a part of a larger political mission or agenda, or just a trade war, a trade tension?
It's very interesting because for the first time in about 50 years, the United States has genuinely changed its foreign policy orientation. Until now, from the 1990s at least, the United States has had an idealist foreign policy. The belief that you can just bomb a country and democracy will sprout up. This is what they attempted in Iraq. Bomb Iraq, and on the bombing fields, you'll have a Jeffersonian democracy. Now the Trump administration has returned the United States to a more realistic foreign policy, a right-wing realism, you can call it. They understand that China is a threat to the United States, but not a military threat. It's an existential threat to the US tech companies. Chinese technology firms, whether it's Huawei or BYD, which makes electric cars, are far better and more efficient and able to produce products cheaper for the world market than US firms. Huawei phones are a lot better than Apple phones. BYD cars a lot better than Tesla. This is a serious challenge to American capitalism. And rather than deal with this in a way that capitalists should, which is invest to make better cars, make them more efficiently, the United States is using tariffs to put pressure on China and then using its military to intimidate China. It's not going to work. China has said they will not enter another century of humiliation. None of the countries of the global south are ready to be humiliated again. Trump is trying something. I just don't think it's going to work.
Vijay Prashad, a pleasure talking to you on Upfront. Thank you for joining us.
I want to thank you for watching. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think regards the perception regards to BRICS and why the depth of discussion is not going anywhere soon. And more importantly, why the de-dollarization will be a threat to an extent that the United States will perceive. But more importantly, if the US continue regards to this particular trend, it will give countries nothing to do but look for alternatives. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.